We want to inspire all of you.
All kinds of acting, theater. It's going to be a great couple of semesters.
Once in a lifetime.
They are your friends. They are my family.
Hey everyone, I'm Scott Wolf and I teach music at Oxnard College in Oxnard, California. I'm excited that you're joining us for another great online event. We at OC Live are committed to keeping us connected as a campus and community with inspiring and informative arts and education programs produced by your very own OC faculty, staff, and students. We want this to be a way for us to stay connected, so don't miss a moment.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another special version of OC Live Conversations. My name is Professor Fontenette from Oxnard College. I'm a business professor in the business department at Oxnard College. I have a very dynamic panel with us today. We have a lot of good conversation, so you are in for a treat. Our topic today is in light of Black History Month. We're going to talk about the place for Black History Month and get a few opinions on its relevance, its history, and perhaps its evolution. So I'll start off our quick introduction of our panel today. I'm going to start with our special guest from Moorpark College. I've known this professor for about 4 years now. He has been a mentor to me. He has been a friend to me, and he just always has the most incredible things to say, and I'm looking forward to his input today. We have Professor Perry Martin from Moorpark College, a business professor at Moorpark College. So welcome, Perry. Thank you for taking time to be here today. Our next guest is a Oxnard College staple. He is, if I'm not mistaken, the chair of our history department. And we appreciate him taking the time to join us today. Looking forward to his historical input and his own personal input. Dr. Josh Leiser is here with us today. Josh, thank you for taking time. And last but not least, I'd love to say saving the best for last. Me and Ross have had a lot of time on a lot of committees and a lot of projects in the last year or so. And just again, really appreciate all this dialogue, input, and depth. Ross is a counselor at our EOPS office. I'd like to introduce Mr. Ross Fonts. Thank you, Ross, for taking time to be here today.
Thank you.
So again, what we try to do in OC Live Conversations is just that. We're looking for conversations. We want it to flow. We want to hear some real conversation here. So please, guys, don't hold back and let us know what you're thinking. Let us know what you know, and let us know what you think you know. All right. So I'm going to jump off right now with our very first question, and feel free to jump in as you wish. Since our topic is Black History Month, I'm just curious. It's evolved and it's come to a place in many people's minds, and it means something different for so many people, whether you're in the Black community or not. Just curious if we can get a foundation on what was your first experience with Black History Month that you can remember, and anyone can jump. Actually, I'll start with our special guest, Dr. Perry Martin.
All right, thanks, Tim. My first memory of Black History Month is in elementary school, seeing the posters of Harriet Tubman go up, Martin Luther King, Carter G. Woodson, many of those. Once you saw those go up, you knew it was time for Black History Month, and there was going to be some speeches and some type of activities. And you also knew that somewhere in that month, you were going to get a really good soul food luncheon. So I always look forward to the food, along with singing and seeing the posters. So that's my first visual experience of Black History Month. But an understanding of what it was about came much further down the road.
Excellent. Yeah. Josh?
Yeah, my experience was actually really similar. Elementary school exposure, posters, food, a lot of those same experiences for me. I think my community growing up was an overwhelmingly white community, so there weren't a lot of African American classmates or teachers. So it was also a larger exposure to Black people's history in general, and socially too, you know. Um, and so for me, I think it was a very formative experience in my first interaction with African American history and the Black community through that history.
All right, Ross?
Well, my earliest memories of Black History Month were at Foster Elementary in Compton. At that time, Compton was predominantly African American city, so the influence and the discussion on Black history was big. Two of my teachers, Miss Montgomery and Miss Matthews, I remember vividly, used to take Black History Month seriously, and they used to take the Pledge of Allegiance seriously. They were both from Alabama. They both marched during the 60s, and they felt like we had a legacy to uphold. And so during Pledge of Allegiance, they always made it clear that, you know, there were certain people that lost their lives, Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, for us to even be able to, you know, be in school and use our education to better ourselves. So I remember those two ladies distinctly, and the seriousness that they took in presenting Black history, but not just during the month, you know, just it was a continuum. And that was my earliest memories, like Perry was saying, with the posters of Carter G. Woodson and Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and those things like that. And of course, you know, I would say after college, you know, after my university experience and then starting to read more on my own as a history major, did those experiences mean much more to me? You know, it was like the little what do they say, the lump of coals that somebody puts in your pocket and later on they turn into gems, because those ladies used to be honest. And so as a kid, you're like, man, I want to go play kickball. And Miss Matthews got us in here doing Pledge of Allegiance and talking about her march with Dr. King. You know, but as I got older, I appreciated it, and it left an indelible mark on me. So yeah, that's my earliest experience.
Yeah, I think same thing. Elementary school, you know, The neighborhood I grew up in was pretty mixed, Black and Latino. But when you're in the classroom, same as Perry, and the posters start going up, right, and on the cork board in the corner, and you know what's coming, right? You know it's coming, and I think we all shared that very similarly, because just like Ross, kind of the same thing. It felt like the thing to do. It happened. You understood it, but it wasn't until later where I started getting a real deeper grasp of it and starting appreciating it a lot more, and learning about it a lot more. I think now as an educator too, and in my adult life, I start looking back now that we have kids, and you look at their elementary school, and guess what? Similar, same thing still happening, where when the posters start going up in late January, you know, in early February, and you start to think like, are we, you know, however many years later and decades later, you know, are they still doing the same thing? Like, are we just kind of following the same pattern? And then you look at the posters and you realize, are they putting up the same people on the posters? Are we talking about the same thing? So that leads me to the next point I'd like to cover on that. What my wife and I have delved in a lot the last few years is a deeper Black history, not just American history. I just notice every year around Black History Month, we're talking about the same people, and to me, we're still talking about a very recent history. You know, we're talking about Martin Luther King, we're talking about Harriet Tubman, we're talking about Rosa Parks. And essentially we're talking about, we call it Black history, but we're essentially just talking about the civil rights movement. Well, with the exception of like Harriet Tubman and stuff like that. Does anybody have thoughts on an evolution or a reimagined Black History Month? Has it served a good purpose? Has it continued to serve a good purpose? Should it evolve? Um, what would that look like in your opinion? Josh, you want to lead us off on that?
Sure. I mean, in history, the move has been towards a more global history for the last 10 or 15 years in scholarship. And so that includes sort of everything in the Western Hemisphere and even beyond. So early American history, we look at something called Atlantic history. And so the slave trade plays a huge part in the foundations of the colonies. And we emphasize that part of that story. In history, I always joke with my students that we've all learned the Disney version of history for most of our lives, right? Especially the elementary school version, which is part of the way Black History Month has been done too. It's the superheroes of history, right? And that's a very simplified, oversimplified way of going about it. And I understand the value in that for maybe some elementary school kids, depending on how you want to think about that. But as we move up the ladder in age, we need to diversify and ask our students to think more critically. And so we're now looking at history finally in this more interactive way where we're thinking about it from the people who are on the ground, not from the top down, but from the bottom up, right? This was a revolution that began in history education in the 60s and 70s, but is only now really coming to fruition widely through textbooks and things like that. So I think for considering Black History Month and the way we teach African American history as part of a larger history, it's important to use that principle. And that's what I always try to do. And I know my colleagues do the same thing in a more intertwined kind of history. And just kind of lay out all the ugly truth and let people wrestle with that and understand it and learn from it.
I like that. There's a few good. I love the Disney analogy. That's perfect, right? And I love that. Like, give the ugly truth, let people deal with it. So, good, very good points. Ross, anything to add to that?
It's kind of hard to say if Black History Month has actually served its purpose, because I feel like there's so much history left unsaid, so much work left undone. I like what Josh said, the superheroes, and I don't think you can really I don't think you can overemphasize the impact of those individuals. I don't feel like we're rehashing the same people. I think we need to go in depth with who those people were, what their times were, and what contributed to them being the superheroes that they came to be. I think they're in our history, they're like our saints. When you talk about Rosa Parks, or when you talk about a Harriet Tubman, you talk about a Mary McLeod, you talk about a Martin Luther King, I think those people still hold a lot of credence and credibility in American history because we have not delved into the deeper understanding of them and the times. So like what Josh is saying about it being interactive, I think as we go and we learn about the person, then we learn more about the times. We learn about the interactiveness of sociology, psychology, and economics in relation to, the boycotts, the bus boycotts, what happened in Tulsa, what happened in Florida. There are sociological, psychological, economic implications there that when we talk about being interactive, we need to be interactive with other disciplines on those experiences. And so I think it is good that we start off with giving the kids an idea of who these people are. And then as we get into college and we go beyond, that we do more research, that we're more engaging. I think that's the piece that gets away from us, is the engagement piece. Not just learning dates and times and people's names, but engage in what really made them be who they were during those times. So I don't know if Black History Month has fully run its course. I think there's some evolution that still needs to happen. I think I always base things on tradition and reason. I think we have to honor the tradition of Negro History Week. We have to honor how it has evolved into Black History Month. But then the reasonable, rational, critical thought in us needs to think about, well, where do we go with this in the future? You know, and that's where I'm at right now. And I don't really have a clear, you know, definition or recommendation of where we should go in the future. But I think it's always up for discussion.
A lot of good points there, Ross. A lot of good stuff. Perry, any thoughts?
I believe everything rises and falls off leadership in terms of organization and institutional vision. So as we look at Black History Month, and we're having a discussion, a dialogue here within Oxnard campus, and we can speak to the district. So we start off locally, and Black History Month is globally, it's nationally. And, you know, the initial question was, what was my earliest experience? And, you know, oftentimes, even in the classrooms, what we know is students will forget what you told them, but they'll remember how they felt. So I spoke to how I felt when I saw the posters going up. And part of that feeling good was the tradition of eating good food, and also knowing that we were honoring these giants that were going up. And these folks always seemed like they were giant, they were larger than life. And we would hear later on during the Black History Month program, and oftentimes the Black History Month program was one single event where they talked about those giants. However, in rethinking Black History Month and approach from a leadership to change the paradigm, just imagine if we had a Black History Month where we focused on all of the contributions of Black folks that have come through Ventura Community College District. Suppose we told their stories. Suppose we were able to share their struggles, their experiences, the challenges. Suppose we took that and used that as a Black History Month program or event. There can be almost a sense of competition when you see different colleges putting on more events than one single college. It shouldn't be a competition. What it should be about is honoring the fact that when Black History Month is spoken of in high schools, K through 12s all across the country, and that has been, there's emphasis put on slavery, and there's this desire to get young folks of all colors and ethnicities to empathize with the slave and the plight of slavery, and also to understand that there still is something now in that Black people have come a long ways, all the way through the Jim Crow era, all the way through the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And you see right down to today in this modern era, this social justice movement, that there's work that's still to be done. So if that's the case, I think rather than setting Black History Month aside or diminishing its importance, I think we should relook at and change the paradigm as to how we approach it. Not get rid of it or not minimize its importance, but the way it approaches it. That said, how do we do it? We take a deeper dive into some of those folks that we were hailed as giants and recognize that they were human. Their accomplishments were grand, but many of them were human, and they had to deal with some of the same human challenges that we are dealing with right now. Many of us have not been in the place where we've been cooped up in the house and dealing with, our relationships and dealing with our own vices or dealing with our own values. But that's been the same with Black folks from the time they were brought over here. So if you look at or listen to the 1619 Project, that does a great job of talking about the history all the way up until now. If we bring it home and bring it closer and redefine how we use Black History Month as an opportunity to share the connection between the folks that have come before us and what we're experiencing now, I think it better serves us. And I do believe that it takes visionary leadership to find a way to make that happen. And I think those of us, the usual suspects, we find ourselves in those spaces where we're often looked to be the ones to do that. But it takes much more than just us, the few of us African Americans within this district, to do that. It takes visionary leadership, it takes alliances, and it takes collaboration. And what's really important is that we owe it to Latinx and white and Asian Pacific, BIPOC. We owe it to everybody to really educate them on African American history and how it's related and how the struggle still continues.
Yeah, and that's a very important point that I completely agree with. It's always interesting when you talk about Black History Month, how people think that it's just for Black people, and we owe it to everyone, outside of the Black community, people of color, white people, whatever, to understand and to really kind of help teach that side of history. If we do that, again, that will that benefits society and its greater good. But a lot of great points, Perry. Just okay. Yeah, but reimagining in that way, and again, I'll combine our 2 points. When I say I look at my kids' elementary school, it seemed like the same thing. You're right, the same usual suspects are asked to put on something for Black History Month every year. And a lot of times the same type of activities are expected also. I think that's a hindrance, if that makes sense. And it does start from the top, because there have been times in my personal experience in the past when I've been asked to participate in something for Black History Month or put something on, and you do try to come up with a new idea or an evolutionary idea or something you think that could be more impactful. And a lot of times, I wouldn't call it a pushback, but the feedback you get is, oh, well, what about what we did last year? What about the same thing? What about, again, a few talks, we'll play an excerpt from Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. And so all great feedback, guys, and good points. I think it's time to delve much deeper into this, into Black History Month.
And
I had
Tim,
another.
I have a question for you, Tim.
Absolutely.
And I hope that we can this is part of the tone.
Yeah.
What right here in this particular episode, we represent these 3 full-time tenured track faculty. We represent over half of the full-time tenured track African-American faculty in this district. And if you, and I'm just curious if you've done this, or either you or Ross have done this. And this is why it's important for in the classrooms. If at the beginning of classrooms, at the beginning of class at the semester, if we ask our students, which oftentimes are predominantly white, then Latinx, and then a few Middle Eastern, Asian Pacific Islanders, if we ask them, how many of you growing up or coming from Ventura County have ever had an African-American teacher, and then ask them to raise their hands, and then look at the numbers. And what I found is that nearly 80% of them say they've never had And for the ones that raised their hands, I asked them, put your hands down if it was a coach. And once you put the coach in, you'll find out that nearly 8 out of 10 of these students have never had an African-American instructor. Now, that puts them almost at a disadvantage because they haven't had that kind of experience. And the reason why I say this in the context of Black History Month is that their lived experience, our lived experience that we get to share with them in the classroom. Black History Month is about talking about the lived experience of those folks that have come before us, that have made contributions. But in this regard, every day that we get in front of those students, we are part of their history and their lived experience. Mm-hmm. And for many of them, they won't even experience an African-American faculty, especially men of color, until they get to secondary school. They won't get that till maybe they get to college. And so that is one of the other areas that when we look at Black History Month and its importance is to know that we are writing history right now. And so when people look back 50, 25 years from now, and they look at Black history and look at the history of this district or this county, they'll be able to, they'll mention our names, and we will have to stand to account as to what have we done? What did we do in this space? So I just wanted to add that point in when we're trying to contextualize Black History Month and its importance.
Yeah, thank you, Barry. Yeah, we always look at Black history in the context of history and in the past, but it's about what did that history do to impact now, and what are we doing now that's going to impact or be impactful to our students in our communities and our world in the future.
I think like Perry said, there's a saying that we're as we sit right now, we're a bridge to the past and the future. And so what we do has an impact, and so when we start talking about Black History Month, I know I went and looked at the site, and I think the theme for this Black History Month in 2021 is diversity, representation, and I think I know diversity and representation and identity, are the themes for Black History Month for 2021. And I think if we can somehow, bring that across to the campus and to the students and to the community, it engages us on a different level, more so than, what did Dr. King say? So when we start talking about identity and representation, and I think the other one was diversity, we aren't a monolith. We got a different idea. We have different ideas. We have different experiences, and we need to take those into account. So when we learn about these individuals, how does that mess with us in relation to our own identity? For me, when you say Dr. King, I've read his book, Where Do We Go From Here, at least 4 or 5 times, because that gives me a better idea of the depth and the thought to I Have a Dream, or the letter from a Birmingham jail. It gives me an idea of Dr. King's identity and where he comes from. I mean, we look at him as Scott said, as Josh says, a superhero, but then you also see him as a man of his times, a man from his community, and the sacrifices that he made, they were huge, So I look at it in so many different terms for me, and I just wanted to bring that point in.
Josh, anything to add, or?
Obviously my experience is different than the three of yours.
Let me just say that we want that input. That is, we appreciate that very much, that input.
Yeah, I think I come at this obviously from my historical training, and I always think about, I'm very thoughtful and intentional about how I approach these topics, because obviously I don't have that personal experience and connection. All I have is my, my readings and my training. But I do think that sometimes comparative approaches are really helpful and how these issues can be addressed. And I think Black History Month in particular, obviously the politics and the history there is so innately connected to our history as a nation, right? And in some ways, it's a lot like the history that Native Americans have faced throughout a lot of American history. And so my mentor at UC Riverside was a man named VP Franklin. He was the former editor of the Journal of African American History. And he and I had a lot of long conversations about, how do you teach African American history as a white person? And how do you approach that? And he was so encouraging. He thought it was really important because he knew that not like Perry was saying, so many students are never going to have an African American teacher. And obviously that's a separate issue that bears a ton of discussion. But he thought, if someone is willing to engage in these issues and talk about them, he encouraged it. And he encouraged me to be comparative in my approach. And so he said, look at what you've read and think about your experiences and look at what you've studied on Native American history and look at what you've studied on African American history and other peoples who have, suffered and had to push for and scratch and claw for every inch that they've ever gotten in life over multiple generations. And he's like, and use that as you think about how you teach these subjects and how you share them with students. And so I've thought about that a lot, and I've tried to do so much of that in my classes, but I also think that students are always lacking a connection to history, even their own history. They rarely know much more than what they learned in grade school. They forget everything else. They learn the version that they get first, and everything in between seems to slip through the cracks over and over again. And so unfortunately, what they remember about things like Black History Month is that elementary school experience. And the more complicated and thoughtful things oftentimes that they get in their teenage years just kind of falls by the wayside in many cases. And so I think Black History Month, like some of these other important things that we need to think about more critically in our modern era, always are seeking for an identity in a different time and a different place. And for some people's communities and certain communities, they're going to be one thing, and in other places, they're going to be something else. And so there is no monolithic Black History Month that I think is going to be effective. I think it needs to be tailored to each individual community and then connected to that community's experience in whatever way possible. And so I show students things in class that I would have thought they all would have seen, right? Clips that were shown to me, speeches, footage, and then they say, I've never seen this before. They've never seen Eyes on the Prize, right? Which has its own limitations, but they've never seen it. They haven't even seen that, right? And so many of them have not been exposed to even the things that we think everyone has seen. And so we have a lot of work to do. And I'm constantly trying to wrestle with how best to approach that.
And I also see that as, Black History Month being a model. I think someone else on the panel had alluded to it being an example for other groups, because I don't want it to be just seen as some ethnocentric month or a pity party of some sort, but to be a model. When you talk about the Native American experience, that our Holocaust and their Holocaust has similarities, and so we need to build on that as well.
I like that, Ross, you just said the pity party, right? And I mean, sometimes I look at not just Black History Month, but a lot of things in the American culture concerning Black people as appeasements, like, oh, here you go, there, go, be quiet, we gave you something, kind of thing. That's always been part of in my adult life, thinking about Black History Month and why all the contributions that Blacks have made to this country aren't woven into just the general American history. But then another side of me would like it to have its own standing and its own merit. But how it's presented, and like you said, it does seem like sometimes, like, the emphasizing either the pity party aspect of it, or the appeasement aspect of it. So, Josh, you made a lot of great points. I want to kind of get back into that and have everyone start talking about, we're going from Black History Month. Ross, great thoughts on the examples, but I want to get everyone's thoughts and ideas on how it's taught and the impact on our students by the time they get to us at the college level. Right? Perry made great points, and that's a great exercise to talk to your students and say, how many of you guys have had, a Black teacher, a Black professor, or a person of leadership or education leadership in front of you, teaching you from their perspective, and little to none have, right? And Josh, you had alluded to earlier in our private conversations, the challenges in K through 12. You were a high school teacher for 7 years, I believe you said, and you saw that, that was something that was lacking. Ross, you taught at the high school level. So I would love to get input from everybody about what does that look like? What does that evolution look like? What changes should we make at the K through 12 level? What does that look like? Apparently what we're teaching, again, when we talk about teaching to memorize and pass tests, not to really learn or not to give a lot of, critical thought to. Does anybody have an opinion on what you think that would look like, what it could look like, what it should look like?
I think one of the approaches that we can take is start from the now, deal with some of the folks and tell the stories of people that have made it now. For example, the Tim Fontenette, that is a business instructor. There's enough research that supports this idea that it's very difficult to become a tenured track business instructor faculty. What is your story? And then back it up and talk about the spaces you have to navigate. And when you talk about the story, the instructor, that they can see and talk about the challenges that you have to navigate through and all of the things that put you in a position where you could be competitive, to where an institution could attract, recruit, and retain a Tim Fontenette. You bring that forth first, and then we work our way back to some of those historical figures, because what we have is a certain level of unconscious incompetence. Those folks that we think we know, we really don't know. We really don't know about the Black Panther Party. And when you hear about the Black Party, you screech and say, that's those radicals, those are ones that want to kill the police, or as they would call it, kill the pigs. You don't really know about Rosa Parks and her real story. You don't really know Martin Luther King, the man, the life. You really don't know the Malcolm X. And if you start reading the autobiography of Alex Haley and you don't finish the book and you get halfway through, you'll walk away thinking he was just a racist and, all blonde hair, blue eyes were devils, because it was too much for you, and you close the book and then you walk away with that bias and you'll stay there. So what we could do is spend a little more time, rather than having a Black History Month program or list of activities and events, really exploring the lives of these folks and talking about some of the challenges. And that takes research. That takes individual that can get scholarly research, verify, and share some of the struggles and help those people come to light. And also teach the students that are here now that you have the capacity in striving to reach your full potential to make a difference now. Because when you leave that Black History Month program, rather than being able to check the block and say, I've done something this month for Black history, you should leave that place saying, okay, now where do I find the space where I can contribute and I can be a part? And it is not just relegated to African-American students. It is a duty for every faculty, staff, and administrator, number one, to advocate for student of colors. We shouldn't even hire people that are not willing to advocate for women and men of color in the institution. And then it is a duty for every individual that does not have any that recognizes institutional barriers, to engage in dismantling institutional barriers that won't allow us to embrace Black History Month events and really achieve reasonable outcomes. So after every Black History Month event, there should be some type of goal or objective. And we should be looking for the institution and find out what kind of institutional constraints, what kind of barriers that are keeping us. So does it start? And I believe our connection from the community college to the K through 12 systems, that kind of relationship. At our Black History Month events, there should be K through 12 throughout the county that should be invited. And we should be modeling and setting an example in dissecting some of those heroes and really telling the stories. And John, you are correct. If they have not seen the eye on the prize, then there's a very good chance they won't understand why the Vietnam had such an impact on African American culture, and why after World War II, the disenfranchisement of Black veterans, and that should be coming from the Veterans Resource Centers. So there's a lot to address, but I think a big picture conceptual framework and tying it all in through maybe the lens of the critical race theory puts us in a position where we can take a scholarly approach to not just Black History Month, but also addressing the need for leadership to get involved and to make real much needed changes to the way we approach any recognition of history or heritage, or any of those activities.
That's so true, Perry. It's so frustrating sometimes as a history professor. I love my job, and I love the time in that I get with the students, but it is hard because some of them, the only time they're ever going to take a history class beyond high school is the one time they take one semester of American history, right? There's no room in their transfer schedule for a specialty history class that's more focused on a group of people or a shorter time period. Their high school experience is so limited, or I hated history quite often from students. Usually I try really hard to change their minds, but they're so limited. And so sometimes these events that we can put together, or a month like Black History Month, is really the only extra exposure they're going to get beyond a single class. And so those who would say, let's get rid of Black History Month, or let's get rid of, these more sort of focused objectives, and say, well, it should be completely integrated in every single class and every single moment. I would tell them that the reality in the classroom, both K-12 and at the college, is that there's not enough time to do any sort of due diligence. And so these opportunities that we have with something like Black History Month, should we choose to harness them, as you're suggesting, in a new and interesting and exciting way, would benefit the students tremendously because of their limited exposure and the limitations that we face institutionally. I'm not saying we shouldn't push past those and seek to break down, but we also have to work within the frameworks that we have, and we have to do the best that we can. And so I think these are opportunities. I always see them that way. In social science, we get Constitution Day every year, and it's the same kind of thing. We get an email 2 weeks before. What are you guys doing for Constitution Day? Like it's only our job to talk about the Constitution. When I think everyone now, maybe now finally will all understand why the Constitution is something everybody should know about. I can't tell you how many of my students have told me they're afraid the president's going to make a law. They don't even know that it's the legislative branch that makes the laws sometimes, right? And these are college students, when the average American never even attends college. So some of these things are more important than we might even realize because of where we work and the education that we've gotten, because so many Americans never have that chance for whatever reason. So we need to make the most of them, in my opinion.
And as I listen to Josh, I believe that some of the issues that we face, even though we're talking about Black History Month, there are issues, there are systemic issues within education that like you only take one history class to just get through. And that's a lot of it is that, you know, I was seeing what was going on in the stock market with the Robin Hood situation and all these, and I'm starting to learn about algorithms and all this stuff. And it's like, man, we spend so much time and we spend so much resources in the commodification of things that history, the humanities, social sciences, they take a back seat to it, and we haven't really put the resources there to really figure out what are we trying to do with the social sciences? What are we trying to do with the humanities? What's the outcome socially, you know, as a society, as a country? What are we trying to get from this? You know, myself, my own personal obligation to education, to my discipline, is to further democracy, you know, make things a little bit more fair, let other people understand that they have a stake in society and they have a responsibility. But if we're not educating them and they're just taking history just to get by and they're remembering a date just to put it on the paper, right? And we're teaching to the test, then we're seeing the results of it now, right? Josh said that a majority of Americans don't attend college. And then the ones that do are miseducated, or they're tracked into some type of profession for the sake of, you know, everybody deserves to earn a living. But then we put such a priority on that, and no other place is more clear and evident than at the university. And I worked in the university, and I seen how the Department of Engineering called the shots. I seen how chemistry and physics, you know, never really, you know, everybody's talking about budgets, but their budgets were taken care of. Art, English, history, those you just keep them afloat, you just tolerate them. They're not really seen as serious disciplines, you know, even to the point where when I was one of my majors at UCSB, I was history and Black studies. And even to the point where my dad was like, what are you going to do with Black studies? You know, I know you Black. That's what he said. You know, I know you Black. What are you going to do with that? You know, and so we got to get beyond that. We got to get beyond that. These disciplines, these majors, they mean a lot to the forward flow of our society. And we haven't been able to talk race, you know. Of course, we know that there's only one race, but then we made up a race or races, and we haven't even really discussed that. And I think that is the foundational problem as well. So I see some of these things that we're talking about are smaller issues to a larger, humongous problem that we're seeing today, and it's playing out right before our eyes.
Ross, I love your point about you know, what we're teaching and how we're teaching and seeing the impact of it right now. It's just interesting. The question I want to pose to everyone also, based on what you're saying, Ross, too, is because we always hear institutionally, and when states and governments do their budgets, education is always on the chopping block for some reason. You know, STEM, what they call STEAM now, because I guess they're trying to put arts into it to make it seem like it has a social conscience. But you know, what they teach and how they teach it, we're starting to see the effects. You said it so eloquently, Ross. Right, it's playing out in front of our eyes. You know, we're seeing what the lack of general knowledge and education on societal, you know, societal norms or societal history and history of different cultures. It's almost a lack of understanding or a lack of empathy in those areas that is causing a lot of the social unrest and civil unrest we're seeing today.
The reason why we're dealing with race and racism is because the actual behavior is discrimination. And what happens when you're not discriminated? What happens when you're not protected? What happens when you are African American faculty on these campuses, and out of very few, and there are students of color that have experienced race and racism right here on our campuses, and they feel like they haven't been heard and nothing has been done about it. So those are some of the kinds of conversations that we could, if Black History Month is one of those periods or spaces where people lay down their guards and come in unarmed, then why not just make it one of those, periods and places where we tackle the really tough issues that will carry us out for the rest of the year. And one other point, I believe Multicultural Day, has its historical significance and its traditions, but having a multicultural campus approach that really embraces and really engages in cultural competence training, that's how you build, but not just the Multicultural Day, and not have the themes being perpetuated throughout the rest of the year. And again, this is the naysayers against Black History Month and even Multicultural Day. I mean, these are the things that trouble people when they try to just celebrate days or weeks or months, is that there's not enough as you mentioned, sustainability of those efforts throughout the rest of the year.
Right. They're like appeasement days or appeasement weeks. Josh, Ross, anything?
When we start talking about Black History Month, we still have so far to go. It's so far to go. And it does have to come from outside pushes. When we talk about, these committees for ethnic studies and things of that nature, because the institution is the institution. We've seen it where a lot of our administrators or a lot of our top brass, they're trying to manage the institution. And if that outside pressure doesn't make you say, okay, we know you're talking about this budget, but what about this? Mm-hmm. If that doesn't happen, then it's business as usual.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, Ross, I feel a lot of that exactly the same way. I think, there's a funny kind of insider joke that happens sometimes in liberal arts where they say, well, only the English teachers grade the papers, right? And the rest, the math teachers grade the math problems, and who knows what the social scientists are doing, stuff like that. But it's kind of like my approach and my feeling is on this is really strong. It's all of our responsibilities, right? We should all be in every discipline and every touch point with students, right? Doing our due diligence and doing our part to bring shared experience and to emphasize people of color, like Perry was saying, people who have done great things locally, right? Showing examples to students of what can be accomplished. And the institutional stuff, we need to push against that for change as well. There's two different avenues. We have to do the thing we can do with our students, and we also have to push against the limitations of the system that we're working within simultaneously. And it's so much work for those of us who are working with students. And for those of you, few who are, African-American professors and instructors, there's even more asked of you because there's so few of you to give that example visibly to students on top of everything else that we're already asking everyone to do. It feels daunting at times, but I'm also hopeful. I listen to what students are saying, and especially in a moment like we're in right now, there is an advantage and an opportunity to put new classes in the schedule and to bring new issues to the forefront that they can then connect with so easily because they've now lived through a moment and they've seen some of the ramifications of that moment play out on their phones and on their televisions. And so maybe we've reached a moment here where we can build a new direction and jumpstart another push forward, like we've seen in our history in the past. There are these leaps that happen for various reasons, and so I'm very hopeful because of the moment we're living in and the impetus that it has created. There are no easy answers, though, unfortunately.
No, they're not. Thank you for that, Josh. I wholeheartedly agree. We are looking at that moment. There's that struggle, and then there's always like that jump. Something happens, and it kind of ignites a lot of what's going on. So I too with you am very hopeful about it. Me and Anitra. We're running out of time here, guys. We're gonna wrap this up. I want to get some final thoughts from each of you guys, or a perspective on what last things you want to say and what you think. What you want people to understand about Black History Month or next steps going forward, or just part on any last thoughts that you guys might have. Very special guest Perry. Let's start with you.
Well, first of all, thank you for the team inviting me to share, and thank you for allowing me to share with my man Ross, that's been the OG here in the district forever. Thank you, Dr. Josh, for being willing to come on. So I just want to thank you all for that. And secondly, I'd like to say it's been a long time since I was in Miss Shelby's class in the third grade, where she put all of the Black students in the back of the class and put the one white student, WC, that was poor and didn't have to change his clothes, which I was jealous of, and I didn't realize he was poor and he just didn't have any clothes. It's been a long time coming between then and experiencing that, and coming from a place of rich Black culture that helped me develop a real strong code and value system, and the appreciation for Black history from a lived experience as well as acquired knowledge, to arrive to in a place where they need us, this county, this district, this community, and to be able to be of service, recognizing that although with just a few of us, we cannot be tokens, and we have to stand up and fight, and we also have to collaborate. So I do want to say that I am grateful for all of the folks across this community in this district that have joined into this social justice fight. And I ask that you don't lose the faith. When your emotions subside, continue to be committed to see this thing through. I believe that we are in a place, what we used to call collegiality, I believe we can call now determinate to be that district that got it right. And I hope when history is written is that they talk about what we were able to get accomplished and how we were able to turn the tide and to really create an inclusive, diverse culture that provided rich, wealthy opportunities for all of our students, our faculty, and our community. So thanks again for inviting.
Thank you very much, Perry. Josh?
I would echo Perry again. I feel like I'm saying that a lot. I want to thank everyone for the opportunity. It was so nice to have these conversations, and I hope that it leads to something for someone, right? And also, I love the idea of focusing on the personal experience and the humanity in all of this. I think exploring a deeper understanding of some of those superheroes, as I called them earlier, looking at regular people's shared experiences. It's all really valuable in a way of connecting with our students' lives and helping them to understand, the challenges that have come in the past and what we can learn from those, and hopefully building a better future for our campuses, our county, our communities, and our country. It's a big task, but we can play our part, and I'm excited about what the future might hold.
Thank you very much. Big Ross.
I guess in closing, I just would say that the importance of Black history is for us to really continue to find an identity for ourselves and find that place in our own history. Because a lot of us, we're talking about, Black history as if we know all these things, and we don't. and we're also looking to set the tone for someone outside of our experience to have compassion and being able to see the struggles that have come before us and that we've been able to endure, and that it is a model for other people as well, not just for us to sit on the soapbox or a pedestal, but to just be an example for other people's and their experiences. Um, I've always, for myself, being outside of academia is where I actually felt like I learned more on my own, more so than being at the university or K through 12. And so when Josh was saying like a majority of Americans don't even come to college, I'm thinking to myself like how can we extend the idea of learning not just being solely exclusive to K through 12 or to the university. And I think maybe Black History Month can help people do that. I've always, one of the things that stuck out to me is when George Floyd was murdered, and we talked about police brutality, and LeBron James was saying people really have to educate themselves. And you're listening to a man who didn't even go to college, who went from playing basketball in high school to the pros. And he's saying to educate yourselves. And I think that is the major theme, is that we have to know that we don't know everything and that we have to continue to educate ourselves. I remember taking a class at UCSB called The History of the Jeffersonian Age for my American History's requirement, because I didn't take American history because I thought it was boring. And so by the time it was ready for me to meet my graduation requirements, they said, oh, well, you don't have an American history class. Like, how can you be a history major and you never took American history? And I said, well, I was taking all these other classes that were more interesting. So I took the history of Jeffersonian age, and the professor was, he had his academic freedom, and it was biased, and he was really a strong advocate for Jefferson, his philosophies, his thoughts, and kind of explained away some of his misgivings. And then I actually took a class called The History of the South. And both these professors are white professors. And so the professor in this History of the South, we were reading memoirs from Sally Hemings. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, if I learned that in History of the South, why am I not getting this in the Jefferson class? And so it was a class of about 70 people, and mind you, I was the only African American in there. And I asked the professor, well, why haven't we covered Sally Hemings, and what did he think about it? And he pretty much cussed me out in front of 70 students, telling me I didn't know what I was talking about. He went into this whole thing about Black studies being mythological history and whoop, whoop, whoop. And needless to say, me being a student and not really, harnessing the power of a student, because I know the students are very powerful. But, that was one of my experiences that just kind of left a mark on me that really signifies the importance of Black History Month. Really signifies the need for critical thinking. It really signifies us needing to go beyond what's laid in front of us when we're talking about history and how we think of things. And so when I think of Black History Month, I think it's important.
Guys, I want to thank you so much for taking the time, accepting the invitation, being very candid, and giving us a lot of really good information to pass along. Perry, always a pleasure, man. I know it's been a while. Always really appreciate your input. Josh, appreciate you taking time out. I know you guys are busy with a lot of things right now. And Ross, as always, I know we've been talking about this for a few weeks, but excited that we finally had the chance to get this done, and look forward to so many other things that we want to try to do in the future. And I hope you guys are open to possible invitations again into the future. So I think we have a lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff came out of this conversation. A lot of it. I was trying to hold in a few things because you guys touched upon a lot of things that were very personal, and we appreciate that. And that's what we want, is real conversation about real topics coming from real people in our community. So with that, I'm going to say thank you guys very much. This is going to conclude our segment of OC Live Conversations, and we look forward to speaking with you guys again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.